Help! The pump! It's wrong! The child's heart rate is dropping. The scream shattered the silence of the pediatric ward. It wasn't just sound. It was panic made visible, vibrating through the sterile air. The alarms on the monitor shrieked in unison, red lights pulsing like a frantic heartbeat. Lila Green froze in the corridor. She had been pushing her janitor's cart down the polished linoleum, mop in hand, earbuds tucked under her messy brown hair. Her name tag, Lila G. Facilities, hung crooked over her blue uniform. She hadn't meant to stop, but something about that sound, the uneven whine of the infusion pump, snapped through her like static. Inside the glass room, two nurses were moving fast. One was checking vitals, the other calling for the on-call engineer. The small girl on the bed couldn't have been older than 6. Her skin was translucent under the fluorescent lights, her lashes fluttering as the beeping quickened. Beside her, a young mother clutched her daughter's hand, whispering through tears. Lila stood there, breath shallow, staring through the glass. The machine was an infusion pump, model Helix 4P7. She'd cleaned them every night for months. Its display flickered ERR47, flow deviation. To anyone else, that code meant nothing. But to Lila, the sound of the pump, the click, hiss, pause, wasn't random. It was offbeat, delayed. She took one small step closer. Her mop handle hit the wall with a soft tap. The engineer burst through the door seconds later, still pulling on his gloves. "What's the error?" "Flow instability," one nurse answered. "Probably a PID loop misfire again," he muttered. "It happens when—" But he didn't finish, because Lila had spoken. "The pump's chasing its own signal." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Everyone turned. The engineer blinked, annoyed. "Excuse me?" She froze. Her throat went dry. I think it's oscillating. The valve's correcting too late." The man frowned. "You're the janitor." Lila's pulse pounded in her ears. "I used to work with irrigation pumps," she said softly. "When the feedback delays longer than the system response, it starts to overshoot. Like this." The nurse looked between them, desperate. The alarm's tone quickened again. P-P-P-Pi, faster, sharper. The little girl's fingers twitched. "Step back," the engineer ordered. "Please, don't interfere." Lila did. She stepped back into the shadow of the hallway, but she couldn't unhear it, the machine's rhythm skipping like a record out of sync. She closed her eyes. She could almost see the waveform, rising too high, falling too fast, the same shape she'd seen years ago on her father's barn table, drawn in pencil beside a broken pump. Her father's voice echoed in memory. "If it breathes faster than it listens, it'll drown in its own pulse." The child gasped. Her mother screamed, "Do something!" Lila opened her eyes. The world around her had narrowed into that single red line on the monitor, jerking like a frightened bird. "Please," she said again, louder. "Reduce the proportional gain. P. It's overcorrecting. Add damping. More D. The delay's throwing it off balance." The engineer froze. "That's not—" But the nurse interrupted, voice breaking. "Let her try, please." For one suspended moment, no one moved. Then the engineer, pale, nodded slightly, perhaps out of exhaustion or disbelief. He adjusted the values. P from 0.92 to 0.46. D from 0.05 to 0.14. The pump hissed once, the noise softened, the line steadied, the child's pulse normalized. Da-dum, 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 slow, perfect, human. The room exhaled all at once. The mother collapsed against the bed, sobbing into her daughter's blanket. The nurse covered her face, whispering, "It's stable." She's stable. The engineer just stared at the display, as if the numbers themselves had betrayed him. Lila took one small step inside. Her sneakers squeaked on the tile. On the side of the machine, a drop of saline overflowed and slid down the panel. She knelt, took out her cleaning cloth, and wiped it away with trembling hands. The cloth smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant. She looked at the reflection of the sleeping child in the metal casing. It felt wrong to be here, kneeling in a place where she didn't belong. And yet, in that instant, everything she'd ever learned from her father, every hour spent fixing broken machines under the Kansas sun, had led her to this moment. One of the nurses finally spoke, voice hushed. "What did you say your name was?" "Lila," she said. "Lila Green." The nurse smiled faintly through her tears. "Thank you, Lila." Lila shook her head, standing slowly. "Don't thank me. Thank the pump. For listening." She turned back toward her cart. Her mop still leaned against the door frame, forgotten. Behind her, the alarms had gone quiet. The only sound left was the steady breathing of a child and the faint, rhythmic hum of a machine finally at peace. Outside in the corridor, Lila paused. Her reflection flickered in the glass. Blue uniform, tired eyes, a face no one noticed. She touched the fabric of her sleeve, still damp from the cloth, and whispered to herself, "Sometimes the floor hears before the machines do." Then she picked up her mop and kept walking. For a moment after the alarm stopped, no one moved. It was as if the whole ward had forgotten how to breathe. The little girl lay sleeping now, her heartbeat steady and strong. The monitor glowed a gentle green instead of screaming red. The air that had been thick with panic now seemed too still, too fragile, as if one wrong word could break it all again. Lila stood just outside the room, her fingers still trembling from adrenaline. The cleaning cloth was damp in her hand. Her reflection in the glass looked almost unfamiliar, pale, startled, like she had just woken from a dream she didn't understand. Behind the door, the nurses were whispering. She knew exactly what to do." "Who is she again?" "The janitor, I think, from night maintenance." "Maintenance doesn't fix pumps." "She didn't fix it. She listened." Lila lowered her gaze. The mop bucket beside her was still half full, the water gray and still, the smell of disinfectant mixed with saline and tears. Somewhere down the corridor, a vending machine clinked, the sound of ordinary life resuming. Then the engineer spoke, his voice cutting through the quiet. That was reckless. He had stepped out of the room, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. His name tag read Eric Dalton, Biomedical Systems Engineer. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a defensiveness that came from too many night shifts and too many errors blamed on his department. "You shouldn't have interfered," he said flatly. "You could have made it worse." Lila didn't argue. She just stood there, cloth hanging at her side. "I know," she said softly, "but it was already getting worse." He blinked, caught off guard by the calm in her tone. "You had no data, no authority, no clearance." She met his eyes for the first time. "I had ears." The nurse from earlier appeared behind him. "She saved that child, Eric." He turned, frustration flashing. "By guessing." "No," the nurse said. "By understanding." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. For a moment, he looked like a man trying to solve a problem that didn't fit any of his equations. Lila didn't stay to watch. She turned, pushed her cart down the hall, and disappeared into the rhythm of her work. The night stretched long after that. By 4:00 a.m., the corridors had gone quiet again. That strange post-storm silence, where the world tries to remember how to sound normal. Lila worked slowly, methodically. Her mop glided across the floor in wide arcs, leaving thin trails that shimmered briefly before fading. Each motion steadied her. It was how she breathed, how she thought. As she moved past room 309, she paused. Through the narrow window, she saw the child's mother asleep in a chair, her head resting on folded arms beside the bed. The little girl's IV line dripped steadily. Each drop landed with perfect rhythm. Tick, 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 like the metronome of a life returning to balance. Lila smiled faintly. She pressed her hand against the glass, a quiet gesture of gratitude to something larger than herself. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Green. It was the head nurse, Mrs. Alvarez, her white shoes whispering on the tile. She carried a clipboard and a kind of wary respect in her expression. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "but also warn you. There'll be questions." Questions? About what happened. About protocol. Mrs. Alvarez sighed. "You saved that girl, no doubt. But the hospital has strict layers. The engineers report to Biomed. We report to administration. Well, janitors don't report to anyone except facilities. You weren't supposed to speak up." Lila nodded. "I understand." The nurse tilted her head. "You don't seem angry." "I'm not." She wrung out her mop, voice quiet. "It's just strange. We're all in the same building, breathing the same air, listening to the same machines, and yet half of us are told never to speak." Mrs. Alvarez looked at her for a long time. "Where did you learn about control systems?" Lila hesitated. The question felt too sharp, too close to a wound. "My father fixed machines on farms," she said finally. "I watched him more than I talked. He used to say every system has a heartbeat. You just have to care enough to hear it." The nurse smiled softly. "He must be proud. He passed away last winter." The words came out steadier than she felt. Mrs. Alvarez reached out, touched her shoulder. "Then maybe he's the reason you were here tonight." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the space between them. Then the nurse walked away, her shoes echoing down the hall. By dawn, Lila finished her rounds. The windows at the end of the corridor began to pale with the first light of morning. She returned to the janitor's closet, a narrow room filled with the scent of ammonia and the soft hiss of the water heater. She hung her mop, wrung out the cloth, and sat on the small wooden stool beside the shelves. The silence was heavy, but not cruel. She thought about the child, the rhythm of the pump, the sudden stillness afterward. Then she thought about Eric, the way his anger wasn't hatred, just fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing control. She understood that fear too well. From her pocket, she pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked, the wallpaper a faded picture of her father beside an old pump in Kansas. He was smiling, grease on his hands. She whispered, "You'd have laughed, Dad. Same problem, just a smaller motor." For a long time, she just sat there, listening to the pipes creak behind the walls. The rhythm soothed her. Not perfect, but steady. Then she took her notebook from her bag, a small spiral one with the corners bent, and wrote 3 lines on the first clean page. 3:07 a.m. Infusion pump overshoot. Error caused by delayed feedback loop. Patient stable after damping adjustment. She paused, then added one more line, smaller, as if it wasn't meant for anyone else. Sometimes, data begins as sound. She tore the page out carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Not as proof, but as remembrance, that even in places ruled by protocol, truth could still be heard. Outside, the sky turned the color of milk. The night shift clocked out, exchanging weary nods. Lila pushed her cart down the hall one last time, wheels squeaking faintly over the tile. At the end of the corridor, she looked back once, at the door of room 309, at the faint light within. Then she whispered, "Hold steady, little one," and walked toward the dawn. By Monday morning, the hospital had already rewritten the story. The official incident log on the internal network read, "At 03:07 a.m., the pediatric infusion pump in room 309 exhibited control instability. Corrective adjustments were made by the on-call biomedical engineer. Patient stabilized." There was no mention of a janitor. No mention of the girl with disinfectant on her gloves and intuition in her bones. Lila read the report on the shared monitor in the staff lounge. She was there to mop the floor, but the screen caught her eye. The words looked sterile, clean, as if fear and courage could be bleached away like stains. She whispered under her breath, "Corrective adjustments? Sure." Eric Dalton, the engineer, walked in just then, holding a mug of coffee and a folder thick with forms. His posture was tense, the way people stand when they expect to be blamed. Their eyes met briefly. Neither spoke. Lila turned away first. She was rinsing the mop when he said quietly, "There's an inquiry meeting at 11. Administration wants a report on the malfunction." "Do they need me there?" He hesitated. "You're not listed. They want department leads only." She nodded. "Of course." Her voice was steady, but something inside her folded. At 11, the meeting began in conference room B2, a windowless space smelling faintly of coffee and formality. Lila wasn't inside, but she could hear muffled voices through the wall as she worked in the corridor, scrubbing a scuff mark from the baseboard. Inside, the biomed chief spoke first. "We believe the PID controller in the Helix 4P7 unit was miscalibrated. The engineer on call adjusted the gain parameters and stabilized output." Someone asked, "Any safety breach?" "None. The system operated within redundancy limits." Lila could almost see their faces, polished, serious, untouched by the tremor that had passed through room 309 that night. No one spoke of the scream. No one spoke of the mother's pleading voice. Eric's voice finally broke through the wall, quieter, uncertain. "It wasn't entirely me." A pause followed. Then the director's tone sharpened. "What do you mean?" "There was someone else," Eric said. "The janitor. She noticed the oscillation first." The silence afterward was heavy, then a chuckle, cold, bureaucratic. "A janitor?" "She was right," Eric said quickly. "She heard the delay, suggested damping." "Mr. Dalton," the director interrupted, "are you telling us a member of the cleaning staff corrected a medical device in active operation?" She didn't touch the device. She guided the adjustment." The director sighed. "Regardless, that's a serious breach of protocol. We cannot endorse unqualified interference." Lila's hand froze on the mop. Through the door, she could hear the scratching of pens, the dry sound of notes being written, lines that would erase her existence from that night. "Draft a statement," someone said. "All communication about this incident must emphasize engineering oversight. No exceptions." The meeting adjourned soon after. The door opened, and a few doctors walked past her without a glance. Eric came out last. He looked pale, conflicted. "They said it's confidential," he muttered. "You're not supposed to talk about it." Lila smiled faintly. "Don't worry. No one listens to janitors anyway." He looked at her then, really looked, and for a second, the shame in his eyes outweighed the exhaustion. "You shouldn't have had to do that alone." "You shouldn't have either," she said gently. Then she pushed her cart away, the wheels squeaking down the sterile hallway, echoing like a clock ticking through a world that pretended not to hear. That afternoon, while she was cleaning the lobby floor, a voice called softly behind her. "Excuse me, are you Lila?" She turned. It was the mother from room 309, dressed now in worn jeans and a sweatshirt, holding her daughter's hand. The child smiled shyly, a bandage still on her wrist. Lila's breath caught. She's okay," the woman said quickly. "Because of you." The child tugged her sleeve, holding up a folded piece of paper. "I drew this for you." Lila knelt to take it. It was a crayon drawing of the hospital room. The monitors, the nurse, and a small figure in blue wiping something near the bed. In the corner, the child had written, in shaky letters, "Thank you for hearing." Lila pressed the paper to her chest. Tears burned her eyes before she could stop them. The mother reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "It's not much, but—" Lila shook her head firmly. "Please, no." The woman's voice trembled. "They said you're not allowed to talk about what happened. That's not right." Lila looked down at the tile, her reflection shimmering faintly in the polish. "It's okay. The machine remembers." The woman smiled sadly. "Then let me remember too." She reached out, took Lila's hand, and squeezed it. For a moment, the fluorescent lights overhead seemed softer, warmer. When they left, Lila sat on the edge of her cart, the drawing still in her lap. The crayons had smeared in places, like water spilled on paper, but the message remained clear. "Thank you for hearing." She unfolded her notebook again. Under her previous note, she added a new line. "Post-incident. Observation unrecorded. Insight dismissed. But data, real data, lives in the ears that care." Then she folded the drawing, slipped it between the pages, and closed the book. That evening, the hallway outside the pediatric ward glowed with soft sunset light. Lila mopped in silence, humming faintly, the same three-note rhythm she'd heard when the pump had gone still. Down the hall, Eric stood watching her. He hadn't spoken again since the meeting, but his hands were deep in his pockets, shoulders heavy with something like regret. After a while, he approached. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for what they wrote." She shrugged. "Paper doesn't hear, Eric. People do." He nodded. "I'll make sure the log reflects what happened. Somehow." Lila looked at him, her eyes soft but firm. "Don't do it for me. Do it so the next voice isn't afraid to speak." He stood there a moment longer, then walked away. Lila returned to her work. When she finished, she wrung out her mop and hung it to dry. The evening lights flickered on, turning the waxed floor into a river of gold. She looked down at her reflection once more, tired, invisible, but still steady. And in that quiet, a thought rose like prayer. They can erase names, but not echoes. The summons came on Tuesday morning, folded neatly in an envelope with the hospital's crest stamped in blue. Ms. Lila Green, attendance required, disciplinary review, 10 a.m., conference room 4B. It wasn't unexpected, but the neatness of it, the crisp typeface, the formality, still made her chest tighten. She stood outside the janitor's closet, letter trembling in her hand. Around her, the hospital moved with the indifferent rhythm of a living machine, monitors beeping, carts rolling, doors sighing shut. For everyone else, it was just another morning. For her, it felt like Judgment Day. At 9:59, she walked into room 4B. The walls were pale gray, lined with framed certificates. A single window looked down onto the parking lot, where rain had begun to fall in thin diagonal lines. Three people sat at the table. Dr. Stephen Lang, Director of Operations; Helen Pratt, Head of Human Resources; Eric Dalton, Biomedical Engineer, the only familiar face, looking uncomfortable. Dr. Lang didn't waste time. "Ms. Green, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." She obeyed. Her chair squeaked softly against the tile. He adjusted his glasses. "We're here regarding the incident that occurred in the pediatric ward early Sunday morning. Specifically, your involvement in adjusting or influencing the operation of a Class II medical device." "I didn't adjust anything," she said quietly. "But you advised an engineer on how to." "Yes," Helen Pratt interjected, voice smooth, administrative. "You're aware that non-certified staff are prohibited from offering operational input on medical devices?" "I am." "So why did you?" Lila looked down at her hands, still faintly rough from chemical cleansers. "Because a child was dying." The room fell still. Even Eric glanced up, startled by the steadiness in her tone. Dr. Lang leaned back. "Heroism is admirable, Ms. Green, but our systems exist for a reason. You could have caused serious harm." Lila met his gaze. "Or prevented it?" He frowned. "You acted outside your scope of duty." "So did the machine," she replied. That silenced him for a heartbeat. Eric cleared his throat. "If I may, what she said that night wasn't random. The system's PID loop was oscillating. She caught it faster than I did." Dr. Lang turned toward him. "Mr. Dalton, are you confirming she influenced your decision?" "I'm confirming she saved the patient." Helen exhaled sharply, the sound of bureaucracy losing patience. "That's irrelevant. The point is process. If everyone began acting on instinct, we'd have chaos." Lila's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Instinct didn't save that girl. Observation did." Helen's eyes narrowed. "Observation?" Lila nodded. The pump was chasing its own signal. Classic feedback delay. You could hear it. The correction came too late each cycle, causing overshoot. I recognized the pattern. Dr. Lang frowned. "Recognized it? From where?" She hesitated, then spoke softly. "From a wheat field in Kansas." They blinked. "My father and I used to fix irrigation pumps," she continued. "We couldn't afford monitors or oscilloscopes. We listened." The sound of a delayed valve is different from a stable one. If you wait too long to act, the pressure swings wider every time. The same principle applies here. The machine was drowning in its own feedback. For a long time, no one spoke. The rain outside thickened, streaking the window with pale gray lines. Eric whispered almost to himself, "She's right. That's exactly what was happening." Dr. Lang folded his hands. His tone softened slightly, but only slightly. "Even if your observation was accurate, procedure exists to ensure accountability. What if you had been wrong?" Lila looked down at the polished table surface. Her reflection stared back. Tired eyes, loose hair, a uniform that still smelled faintly of ammonia. "Then I would have been another nameless janitor who said something foolish. But if I had stayed silent, that little girl would be a number on your report." The words hung there, impossible to file. Helen Pratt sighed, flipping through papers. "You realize this sets a precedent. The administration can't simply endorse unverified input." Lila's hands rested on her lap. "I'm not asking for endorsement," she said. "I'm asking for listening." Dr. Lang looked at her, then at Eric, then back again. Something shifted behind his eyes, a glimmer of uncertainty in a man used to perfect order. He tapped the table once. "We'll review this and issue our findings by the end of the week. You may return to your duties." Lila nodded. "Thank you, sir." As she stood to leave, Eric rose too. "Wait," he said quietly. "There's something I think you should see." He opened his folder and slid a printed graph across the table. It showed two waveforms, one wild and jagged, the other smooth and steady. "This was before and after her suggestion," he said. "The damping ratio matches her exact prediction." Dr. Lang leaned forward, studying it. "Numbers don't lie as easily as people." Helen spoke softly now. "That's impressive for someone without formal training." Lila smiled faintly. "Machines don't care who listens, ma'am. They just need to be heard." After the meeting, she walked out into the rain. The hospital courtyard was empty, puddles gathering beneath the trees. She stood under the awning, the letter in her pocket growing damp around the edges. Eric caught up with her near the entrance. "They won't punish you," he said. "Not after that graph." She shrugged. "They might still erase me, but that's lighter than guilt." He looked at her, curious. "Do you ever regret it? Speaking up?" Lila thought for a long moment. The rain fell softer now, like static fading. "Every time I open my mouth in this place, I'm afraid. But silence scares me more." He smiled faintly. "You know, they're starting to talk about creating a system for staff to flag technical concerns, an internal feedback channel. It's just an idea, but..." She turned toward him. "They'll call it something bureaucratic, won't they?" "Probably." She laughed quietly. "Maybe safety voice. That sounds polite enough for paperwork." He chuckled. "You might be onto something." The rain thinned to a mist. Across the parking lot, a faint rainbow arched through the fog. Fragile, brief, but real. Lila pulled her hood over her head, looked back at the hospital's towering facade, and whispered, "Let them build their systems. I'll keep listening." Then she stepped into the rain, the sound of droplets on concrete, steady as a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm. Silence has a way of lingering longer than sound. In the days after the hearing, it became the quiet background hum of St. Helena Hospital. No one mentioned the incident anymore. No one said her name. It was as if Lila Green had been gently folded out of the story, removed without malice, but with the precision of a scalpel. The official memo pinned to the staff board read only, "Engineering and operations have reviewed procedures for medical device oversight. All staff are reminded to adhere to defined scopes of duty." That was all. No thank you. No lesson learned. Just a rule, sharpened by silence. Lila didn't complain. She kept showing up for her night shift. Blue uniform, mop, the quiet rhythm of her cart's squeaky wheel echoing down the sterile corridors. But she could feel the change. The same people who once smiled now looked past her. The nurses avoided eye contact. Eric still nodded, but his nods grew smaller, quieter, cautious. One night, she overheard two orderlies whispering near the elevator. "That's her. The janitor who almost cost the hospital a lawsuit. She didn't cost it. She saved the kid." "Doesn't matter. She made them look bad." The elevator dinged. They stepped in. Lila stood in the empty hall, her reflection distorted in the polished metal doors. She whispered to no one, "Machines aren't the only ones that oscillate." By Wednesday, the rain had stopped, but the air in the building still felt heavy, saturated with things unsaid. Around midnight, she returned to the pediatric floor to wax the hallway. Her mop glided slowly, tracing crescents of shine under the flickering lights. As she passed room 312, she heard a faint beep, then another, irregular, uneven. Not the shrill alarm of crisis, but something subtler, a hesitation. She froze. It was the same kind of pause she had heard before, the half-second lag between cause and response. But this time it wasn't from the infusion pump. It was coming from the ventilator. Inside, a baby lay under a soft glow, a tangle of wires and translucent tubes connecting life to machinery. The nurse on duty sat nearby, typing notes into a chart, earbuds in. Lila stepped closer to the window. The ventilator's readout showed minor fluctuations, too minor to trigger an alarm, but enough for someone listening to notice. The waveform jittered like a stutter in breath. She felt that old pull again, that instinct that lived somewhere deeper than training. The same whisper her father once said every good mechanic obeys. Don't just watch the gauge, hear the sigh. She tapped softly on the glass. The nurse looked up, startled, pulling out an earbud. Everything okay? Lila hesitated. I think the ventilator's feedback valve is delaying. The nurse frowned. It's within tolerance. The system hasn't flagged it. I know, but it's breathing late. Half a beat behind. The nurse's tone cooled, cautious. Lila, I appreciate it, but after last week, maybe it's better if you let Biomed handle it. I'm not touching anything, Lila said gently. I'm just listening. The nurse smiled politely, the kind of smile that ends conversations. Thank you. I'll check it later. She returned to her screen. Lila stood there a moment longer, the sound tugging at her. The ventilator's rhythm felt wrong, a heart that couldn't find its own echo. She finally walked away, the squeak of her cart fading into the hall. In the staff lounge, the air smelled of burnt coffee and lemon wipes. She sat alone at the corner table, notebook open, pen hovering above the page. She wrote, 0037 a.m. Ventilator lag, room 312. Amplitude stable. Timing deviation. .4s. No alarm triggered. Nurse informed. Then she stopped. Her hand hovered above the last line. She wanted to write more, to describe the sound, to record what she felt instead of what she saw, but her fingers stiffened. The last time she had described a rhythm, it had become an argument, a hearing, a warning letter. This time, maybe silence was safer. She closed the notebook, slipped it back into her pocket, and whispered, "Don't fix what they don't want fixed." Still, the rhythm stayed with her. That uneven sigh, repeating in her memory like a ghost tapping on glass. 2 days later, she arrived for her shift to find the entire corridor buzzing. Nurses gathered around the nurses' station, voices hushed but urgent. She caught fragments of words. Ventilator error. Sudden drop. Nearly coded. Room 312. Lila's breath caught. She pushed her cart aside and ran down the hall, her shoes skidding on the waxed floor. Inside the room, technicians were recalibrating the ventilator, their gloves moving fast, their faces pale. Eric stood among them, sweat beading on his temple. He glanced up as she entered, shock flashing across his eyes. "You heard it, didn't you?" she said. He didn't answer, but the silence said enough. The biomed chief barked orders. "Replace the control board! It's the same firmware delay as last time. PID sync issue." Lila gripped the doorway, heart pounding. She wasn't angry, just unbearably sad. Because the sound she'd heard 2 nights ago had been real. Because she'd chosen silence. Because silence had chosen her back. When the chaos settled and the baby's breathing finally steadied, she found herself standing alone in the dim hallway, the scent of alcohol swabs and panic still hanging in the air. Eric approached quietly. "The delay was 0.43 seconds, he said softly. "Exactly what you wrote in your note." Lila's head snapped up. You saw my notebook? I found the entry when it pulled the logs. You were right again. She didn't smile. Being right doesn't matter if nobody listens. He nodded slowly. It will. Will it? He hesitated. Lang's finally talking about creating that reporting system. Anonymous input, open channel. He called it Safety Voice. Lila exhaled. So it's real now. It's real because of you. She shook her head. No, it's real because of the silence that almost killed someone again. Eric looked at her for a long moment. You could lead it, you know. Train others to listen. Lila laughed quietly, a tired sound. Who wants to be taught by a janitor? Someone who's tired of not hearing, he said simply. That night, when her shift ended, she sat by the hospital window overlooking the parking lot. The neon sign of St. Helena Children's flickered faintly in the drizzle. She opened her notebook once more and wrote slowly, deliberately, silence spreads faster than sound, but truth travels longer. She tore out the page and pinned it to the bulletin board in the staff lounge. No signature, just her handwriting, small and calm. By morning, someone had drawn a small heart next to it. And for the first time in days, when Lila walked the halls, a few heads lifted to meet her eyes again. The hospital auditorium smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Rows of folding chairs gleamed under the fluorescent lights. On the stage stood a single podium, a projector screen, and a banner that read in bold navy letters, Safety Voice Initiative, because every ear matters. Lila stood in the back of the room, mop handle resting against her shoulder, unsure why she'd even been asked to come. It was Eric who'd insisted. They're announcing the new system, he'd said. Anonymous feedback for all staff. It's your idea, Lila, even if you never meant it to be. She had laughed softly. Ideas don't belong to people, Eric. They belong to need. But now, looking at the banner, she felt a flicker of disbelief. She'd spent years invisible, spoken only to by walls and waste bins, and today, those same walls were echoing a phrase she had whispered in passing. Safety voice. Two words that had once sounded like sarcasm, now printed, laminated, and mounted for applause. Dr. Stephen Lang opened the event. His tone was formal, rehearsed, the cadence of a man who had learned how to sound like progress. We believe safety isn't a department. It's a dialogue. The Safety Voice program empowers every staff member, from surgeon to sanitation, to report concerns that could affect patient well-being. A slide appeared behind him. Sleek logo, clean blue typography. There were bullet points about feedback channels, data review, and AI-assisted categorization. People nodded. Some even clapped. Lila listened quietly, standing near the door. The words were right, but the rhythm was wrong. It was too clean, too polished, like a melody played without breath. Her chest tightened. They've turned it into paperwork again. Then Lang's voice broke through her thoughts. We'd like to invite someone special, a member of our night staff, to share a few words about why listening matters. Heads turned. Eric looked at her from the front row and gave a small nod. Ms. Lila Green, Lang announced. Would you join us? The room blurred for a moment. Her first instinct was to refuse, to shrink, to vanish into the walls that had kept her safe. But then she remembered the ventilator's uneven sigh, the baby's near silence, the second chance that came only because someone had finally listened. She stepped forward. Each step echoed louder than the one before. At the podium, her hands trembled slightly. The microphone buzzed as she adjusted it. Dozens of faces stared. Doctors, administrators, nurses, people who had passed her 1,000 times without ever seeing her. She cleared her throat. The room waited. "I'm not used to microphones," she began softly. "The machines I work with don't need them." A few quiet laughs rippled through the crowd. "I clean floors," she continued. "That means I'm always the last to leave a room, the last to hear how silence really sounds. And when you listen long enough, you learn that even silence has rhythm." She paused. "A few weeks ago, a pump failed in pediatrics. Later, a ventilator nearly did the same. Both times the problem wasn't code or wiring. It was delay, feedback chasing itself too late. And I think people aren't so different from machines." No one moved. When someone speaks and no one hears, their voice starts chasing itself too. It loops, it shakes, it destabilizes everything around it. That's how small errors become tragedies, not because the system failed, but because the system didn't listen. A doctor in the front row shifted, eyes lowered. "This new program you've made, Safety Voice, it's a good start. But don't let it become just another form, another checkbox. Listening isn't policy. It's patience." She hesitated, searching for words she hadn't rehearsed. "Machines don't care about rank. A valve doesn't open faster because a director tells it to. It opens because someone heard when it started to stick." Lang leaned forward, hands clasped. For once, he wasn't writing notes. He was simply still. "You gave this program a name," Lila said. "But the real Safety Voice isn't an app or an email. It's every person in this building who's afraid to speak, and does it anyway." Her throat tightened. She looked down at her hands, one holding the podium, the other still faintly smelling of disinfectant. "The first night I heard the pump misfire, I almost stayed silent, because I was just the janitor, but the machine didn't care who I was. It only cared that someone heard its mistake. That night, I realized something my father once said in our barn in Kansas. Every system breathes, Lila. The good ones just learn to breathe together." The room stayed quiet long after she stopped speaking. It wasn't the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of understanding, that rare, fragile space where logic and humility meet. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then the whole room. It wasn't thunderous. It was gentle, measured, almost rhythmic, like the steady pulse of a machine rediscovering balance. After the applause, Eric found her by the door. "You did it," he said. Lila smiled faintly. "No, they did. For once." He handed her a small envelope. "Lang asked me to give you this." Inside was a laminated card. It read, "Safety Voice Mentor, Observational Training Program." Her name was printed in neat black letters below. Lila looked at it for a long moment, then shook her head. "I never wanted a title." "Then think of it as permission," Eric said, "to keep listening." She tucked the card into her notebook, between the page that said, "Silence spreads faster than sound," and another blank one waiting for what came next. That night, she worked her usual shift. The halls were quiet again, but not empty. From time to time, nurses stopped to nod, engineers asked how the pumps sounded, and when she passed room 309, the room of the first miracle, she paused. The child who once lay there was gone now, discharged, healthy. Only the machine remained, humming softly, steady as breath. Lila placed her hand gently on its metal casing. "Still listening?" she whispered. A faint vibration answered under her palm, calm, perfect, alive. She smiled, then picked up her mop, the cloth folded neatly in her pocket, and began to clean the floor, each motion slow, graceful, deliberate, like a conductor guiding a quiet symphony of unseen hearts. 1 year later, the rhythm of the hospital had changed. Not louder, not faster, just steadier, like a heart that had finally learned its own pace. The Safety Voice program had grown beyond the walls of St. Helena. 12 hospitals across the state now used it. There were posters in break rooms that read, "If you see something, hear something, say something." But in the smaller print beneath, the slogan Lila herself had written was preserved, because sometimes data begins as sound. She never got used to seeing her words on walls. It felt like looking at an echo, familiar, yet distant, belonging to everyone now. That morning, she walked through the training center, a repurposed wing of the hospital that smelled faintly of chalk and disinfectant. A dozen young nurses sat at folding tables, listening as Eric lectured about system safety. Charts glowed on the projector screen. Control loops, feedback delay, signal stability. Then he turned to her. "And now, Ms. Lila Green will lead the observation exercise." They clapped politely. Lila smiled, embarrassed, and moved toward the front. She was still in her blue janitor's uniform. She'd never wanted anything else. On the desk beside her sat an old Helix 4P7 infusion pump, long retired, its casing scuffed, its cord coiled neatly like a sleeping snake. "We're not going to talk about data today," she said. "We're going to talk about sound." The room went quiet. She reached over, pressed the power button. The pump whirred to life, its motor humming softly. "Every machine has a rhythm," she said. "And like people, it tells you when it's scared." The students exchanged puzzled looks. Lila smiled. "When the feedback is right, it breathes easy. When it's wrong, it fights itself. Listen carefully." She adjusted a small knob. The hum began to stutter, just slightly, an uneven pulse. "That's overshoot. The control signal's chasing the target." She adjusted again. The tone steadied. "That's balance. Now, tell me the difference." For a moment, all they heard was machinery, mechanical, cold. Then one student, a young woman named Renee, raised her hand. "The second one feels calmer." Lila's eyes softened. "Yes, feels, not measures." That's where understanding begins. After the session, Renee stayed behind. She was 22, bright, newly certified, still carrying the raw eagerness of someone who thought every problem had a manual. "Ms. Green?" she asked shyly. "Can I show you something?" Lila nodded. They walked to the NICU wing, the quietest part of the hospital, filled with tiny breaths and blinking lights. Renee pointed to a new model ventilator. "It's been jittering, but the diagnostics say it's fine. I can't find the issue." Lila listened. The hum was soft, steady. But beneath it, a faint pulse wavered, almost like a hiccup between beats. "You hear that?" Lila asked. Renee frowned. Maybe?" Lila smiled. "Close your eyes. Don't think. Just listen." The young nurse did. For a long moment, there was only the whisper of air, the distant ticking of the clock, and that faint, irregular pulse. Then Renee's eyes opened wide. "It's late. The exhale's slower than the inhale." "Exactly." Renee stepped closer, heart pounding. "But that's not in the specs. It's within margin." Lila shook her head gently. "Margins don't save lives. Moments do." Together they checked the log. Sure enough, the sensor had a 0.3-second lag due to a calibration drift. Nothing catastrophic. Yet. Renee stared at the data, then back at Lila. "You really can hear it." Lila smiled. "Now you can too." That night, as the hospital quieted, Lila sat alone in the cafeteria, sipping weak coffee. Outside, the world hummed. Generators, vents, the far-off rhythm of traffic. All of it part of one vast, breathing network. Eric found her there. "They're sending you to Kansas next month," he said, "to train staff at Mercy Plains Hospital, your hometown." Her breath caught. "Kansas?" He nodded. "Lang thinks it'll help expand the program." She looked out the window. Beyond the city lights, she imagined the endless wheat fields, the smell of sun-baked iron, the sound of her father's old pump sighing beneath the wind. "It's strange," she said. "I left that place to learn how to live quietly. Now I'm going back to teach people to listen." Eric smiled. "Maybe that's what progress sounds like." When she returned to her locker later that shift, she found something taped to the door. It was a drawing, done in crayon. A little girl with pigtails standing beside a hospital bed, holding a janitor's hand. At the bottom was a single word, scrawled in uneven letters. "Still listening." Her throat tightened. She didn't need to guess who it was from. She folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside her notebook, right next to the old pages that smelled faintly of bleach and sleepless nights. The cloth she had used that night, washed, frayed but intact, lay folded between the pages like a pressed flower. She closed the notebook and whispered, "New rhythm, same heart." Then she walked back into the corridor. A nurse passed, humming softly. Somewhere down the hall, a ventilator clicked and sighed, perfectly on time. And for the first time in years, Lila didn't feel like she was the only one listening. The train sliced through the plains like a quiet, silver scar. Outside the window, Kansas stretched endlessly, gold, dust, and sky. Lila sat by the glass, her reflection flickering between the passing fields. It had been 10 years since she'd left this land, chasing the small hope that a janitor's daughter might find more than noise in the world. Now she was returning, carrying a program with her, and the echoes of every machine that had ever learned to breathe because she listened. The closer the train drew to her hometown, the stronger the memories came. The smell of diesel and rain-soaked earth, her father's laugh, deep and broken by years of dust, the rhythmic cough of the old water pump that had taught her more about feedback loops than any textbook ever could. She whispered under her breath, "If it breathes faster than it listens, it'll drown in its own pulse." The words still felt like a prayer. Mercy Plains Hospital was smaller than she expected. A single-story brick building surrounded by wheat that whispered when the wind passed through. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee gone stale. The sign by the entrance read, "Welcome Safety Voice Training. Facilitator, Ms. Lila Green." She almost laughed. To the people here, facilitator sounded like authority. But to her, it only meant listener. The administrator, a kind woman named Marjorie, greeted her warmly. "We're honored to have you, Ms. Green. Our systems are outdated, but our hearts are willing." "That's all any system needs," Lila said with a smile. That afternoon, she met the staff. 6 nurses, 2 engineers, and 1 farmer-turned-paramedic who fixed the hospital's tractors when not driving the ambulance. They gathered in a small classroom, fans humming against the summer heat. Lila set the Helix 4P7 on the table, the same model she had once saved a life with. "This isn't just a pump," she began. "It's a conversation, between signal and response, between hope and hesitation." The group listened politely, though a few exchanged uncertain glances. She powered the machine. The hum filled the room, steady, low, but imperfect. "What do you hear?" A young technician shrugged. "Just noise." Lila smiled. "That's what I heard too when I was your age. Until the day my father asked me to fix a pump that didn't sound wrong but felt wrong. She turned a small dial. The tone shifted, a faint stutter, a hiccup in the rhythm. "That's overshoot," she said softly. "Pressure chasing its own echo. The system doesn't know it's wrong, but the sound does." The room fell quiet. She looked at them one by one. "Machines are honest. They tell you when they're scared. You just have to care enough to listen." The farmer paramedic chuckled. "Never thought fear made noise." Lila grinned. "Everything afraid does." When the session ended, Marjorie approached her with a worried look. "Would you mind looking at something real?" She led Lila to the neonatal room. A single incubator sat in the center, surrounded by outdated monitors. Inside, a newborn, barely a week old, slept under a halo of soft blue light. Marjorie whispered, "The ventilator's old. We've recalibrated it 3 times, but it keeps drifting. The readings are fine, yet the babies tire too quickly." Lila stepped closer. The ventilator hummed quietly. To most, it would sound normal, smooth even, but to her, there was a tiny tremor at the end of each exhale, a pause that didn't belong. "It's breathing late," she murmured. Marjorie frowned. "You can tell?" "By the sigh," Lila said. "It's half a heartbeat behind." She adjusted a setting, just slightly, reducing the control loop's gain. The sound steadied. The baby's chest moved easier, smoother, as if the machine and the child had finally agreed on a tempo. Marjorie stared. "How did you—" Lila smiled gently. "Same song, different key." That night she stayed behind after everyone left. Outside, the fields swayed beneath the moon, and the wind carried the smell of rain-soaked iron, the smell of her childhood. She walked out back, past the storage sheds, to the old irrigation system the hospital used for its garden. There it was, the pump. The same design her father once repaired by hand, patched with wire and prayer. It hadn't run in years. She knelt beside it, brushing off the dust. The metal was cold beneath her fingertips, but when she turned the crank, the faintest hum rose. Hesitant, uneven. "You're still here," she whispered. "Still trying." For a moment, she could almost see him. Her father's silhouette under the barn light, cigarette glowing in the dark, his voice calm as he listened to the same rhythm. "You don't fix it by hitting it harder, Lila. You fix it by hearing what it's trying to say." Her eyes stung. She tightened a loose bolt, turned the crank again. This time, the pump sighed, slow, even, alive. She laughed quietly through tears. "Good girl," she said. "You remembered." The next morning, as the staff arrived, the irrigation pump was running, steady, clear, perfect. When they asked who fixed it, she only shrugged. "It fixed itself. I just listened." The farmers laughed, but they would tell that story for months. Before she left Kansas, Marjorie handed her a small box. Inside was a brass valve handle, old, worn, and still faintly warm from the morning sun. "From the pump," Marjorie said. "A token of thanks. It'll remind you where your rhythm began." Lila held it in her palm, feeling its weight. Simple, honest, alive. When the train carried her away that evening, she looked out at the endless wheat fields again. The setting sun turned them into waves of molten gold. Somewhere among them, an old pump whispered into the wind, and she smiled. "Every system breathes, Dad," she said softly. "And now they all listen." 2. The rails clicked beneath the train, rhythmic and perfect, like a heartbeat made of steel and memory, carrying her forward into the hum of the world she had helped to steady. It began with static. On a Tuesday afternoon, just as Lila was finishing her remote training session, her tablet buzzed with a new message, the kind marked urgent in red. System alert. Safety voice priority case, Sentara Medical Center, Chicago. She frowned. Sentara was one of the new hospitals that had adopted the Safety Voice program 3 months ago. The message continued. Ventilator cluster error. Feedback instability suspected. Local engineers unable to replicate anomaly. Please advise remotely. She could already feel the adrenaline rise, that strange, calm focus that always came when a machine cried out for help. She called Eric immediately. "Chicago?" he asked, voice tense through the speaker. "That's a pediatric ICU. They reported erratic breathing cycles across multiple ventilators, but no alarms triggered." "PID synchronization," Lila murmured. "If it's across units, the fault isn't hardware. It's timing, networked feedback drift." Eric hesitated. "You think you can diagnose it from Kansas?" Lila looked out the window. The wheat swayed like waves under the sky, their rhythm perfect and ancient. "I don't need to see it," she said. "I just need to hear it." Within an hour, she was connected to the Sentara control network through a secured audio feed. What streamed into her headset wasn't music. It was chaos disguised as order. The ventilators hummed in a staggered cadence, hundreds of them, each slightly out of sync. To an engineer, it was harmless variation. To Lila, it was panic. She closed her eyes, filtered out the human voices, the digital noise, the city's hum beyond the hospital walls. She focused only on the machines, on the way they breathed. There it was. A delay, small but lethal. A single half-second offset that rippled through the network like a heartbeat echoing inside metal lungs. She whispered to herself, "You're chasing your own pulse again." Her fingers moved across the control interface. She traced the frequency response, saw the oscillation curve dip and rise like a wave that couldn't find its shore. She opened the comms. "Eric, tell their team to check the synchronization module. The master clock's drifted by 0.5 seconds. The system's correcting against stale data." He relayed the message. On the other end, an engineer's skeptical voice crackled through, "That's impossible, the server's stable." "Stable doesn't mean alive," Lila replied. "Machines lie quietly before they fail." There was a pause, then hurried typing, the sound of codes being entered. 5 seconds later, she heard it. The tone shifted. The chaos smoothed. The network exhaled in one perfect synchronized sigh. She opened her eyes. The graphs on the screen steadied into flat green lines. A nurse's voice broke through the channel, trembling. "The baby's breathing normalized, whatever you did." It worked. Lila leaned back, heart pounding, the headset still warm against her ear. She whispered, "They just needed to hear themselves again." Hours later, when the crisis was over, Dr. Lang called. His voice, usually crisp with authority, was softer now. "We reviewed the logs. You were right. Clock drift. Less than a second, but enough to desynchronize multiple ventilators." "That's all it ever takes," she said. "You've just prevented a mass critical failure, Lila. Do you understand what that means?" She smiled faintly. "It means they'll finally believe that listening isn't local anymore." Lang hesitated. "How did you even know?" "We didn't have diagnostics for that." "I didn't," she said simply. "But the rhythm told me." There was a long pause on the line. Then Lang said softly, "Maybe one day, medicine will give sound the respect it gives sight." She replied, "It already does, in hearts." That evening she walked outside into the Kansas twilight. The air was thick with the smell of rain and grain. She carried her father's brass valve in her pocket, the metal warm against her palm. From the distance, she could hear the hospital's irrigation pump still turning, steady and confident. She knelt beside it, pressed her ear to its casing. The rhythm matched the ventilators she'd just saved half a continent away. The same eternal pattern of inhale and exhale, cause and correction. "You see, Dad?" she whispered. "It's all the same language, whether it's water or breath." The horizon glowed faintly gold. Fireflies blinked between the stalks of wheat like data lights scattered across the field. Her tablet buzzed again. A message from Centerra's chief engineer. "Thank you, Ms. Green. We couldn't have heard it without you." She smiled. "That's the point," she typed back. "Now you can." Later that night, she wrote in her notebook, 9:23 p.m. Multi-unit synchronization failure. Source, temporal feedback drift, 00.5 s. Correction, realigned master clock via auditory confirmation. Result, stabilized respiration across network. Note, the world breathes in echoes. When one lung falters, the others feel it. She closed the notebook, placed it beside the old cloth and the child's crayon drawing. Outside, thunder rolled softly, far away. The sound of systems correcting themselves, the sky exhaling in balance. She leaned against the window, listening to the rain tap against the glass in a perfect three-beat pattern. Somewhere in that rhythm, she could still hear her father's voice. "Every machine carries an echo, Lila. The secret is not in fixing the noise, it's in finding the harmony." She smiled. The rain grew steadier, washing the fields clean. In the dim reflection of the glass, she saw the faint green light of her tablet, steady, rhythmic, alive. The machines were breathing evenly again, and for the first time she realized she wasn't just hearing them anymore. They were hearing her. The world had grown louder. Hospitals now hummed with the steady harmony of machines that listened. From Boston to Nairobi, from floating clinics in the Pacific to mountain infirmaries in Peru, the Safety Voice Network connected more than 3,000 institutions. And at the quiet center of it all was a name most people had never seen: Lila Green, the janitor who once stopped to listen at 3:07 a.m. 15 years had passed. The world had changed, but she hadn't much. Her hair had silvered, her uniform had faded, but her steps still made the same soft sound against the floor, the rhythm of a caretaker who moved gently because she understood how fragile balance could be. That morning, a letter arrived from Geneva. It was an invitation printed on the thick paper, bearing the seal of the World Biomedical Systems Conference. "We invite Ms. Lila Green, founder of the observational method behind the Safety Voice Network, to deliver the closing keynote, The Breath of the World." Lila read it twice. Then she laughed. The quiet, disbelieving kind of laugh that only those who never sought recognition can make. She tucked the letter into her notebook, between the old drawing of the little girl and the page that once said, "Silence spreads faster than sound." The flight to Switzerland crossed the Atlantic at dawn. Through the window, clouds rolled like the wheat fields of Kansas. Each patch of sunlight below reminded her of the hospitals she had never seen but somehow heard. A world stitched together not by wires, but by listening. When she landed, she was met by a young volunteer in a white conference badge. "Ms. Green," the woman said, eyes shining, "it's such an honor. I studied your method in school. They said you changed how we think about signal integrity and human observation." Lila smiled. "I didn't change how people think. I just reminded them to stop thinking long enough to listen." The auditorium was enormous. Glass ceilings, a stage of pale oak, and 1,000 chairs filled with doctors, engineers, and policymakers from every continent. Behind the podium, a single phrase glowed on the screen. The breath of the world. When her name was announced, she stepped forward slowly, her old janitor's shoes quiet against the wood. No medals, no titles, just presence. The applause faded. The lights dimmed slightly, and she began. When I was 23, I was a janitor in a children's hospital. One night, a machine panicked. Everyone thought it was just noise. But I heard fear in that noise. It was breathing wrong, a feedback chasing itself. She paused. The translator's earpieces flickered across the hall, her words moving like ripples into dozens of languages. That night, I didn't fix a machine. I helped it remember how to breathe. Since then, I've learned that hospitals, cities, even nations, they're all systems too. And like any system, they can forget their rhythm. The room was silent. Even the air seemed to wait. We built machines to save lives, she said. But we forgot the simplest truth. Machines don't need us to shout louder. They need us to hear softer. She walked away from the podium, closer to the edge of the stage. Her voice lowered, intimate, as if she were speaking to every heartbeat in the room. Every feedback loop begins with trust. Every safe system begins with a pause. Every miracle begins when someone listens, not because they're told to, but because they care. She stopped. Her hand brushed the old brass valve she wore on a thin chain around her neck, her father's. My father fixed water pumps in Kansas. He used to say, "Every machine has a soul, Lila. The trick is knowing when it's sighing." Now, after all these years, I think the world itself sighs too. It's in the wind that cools a fever ward. It's in the hum of a generator that keeps a baby breathing in the dark. It's in all of us, this quiet rhythm that asks to be heard. A hush blanketed the hall. Somewhere near the back, a translator lowered her headset and wiped her eyes. Before we build smarter machines, Lila said finally, we must learn to listen like humans. She bowed her head slightly, not in pride, but in reverence for the silence that followed. It was the same silence she had once heard after the alarms stopped. That sacred stillness when a child begins to breathe again. Then, one by one, the audience rose. Not clapping wildly, but slowly, in sync. Palms meeting palms in a calm, rhythmic pattern. 1,000 hands creating one shared heartbeat. That evening, after the conference, she walked alone along Lake Geneva. The water was smooth as glass, reflecting the lights of the city. She sat on a bench, unwrapped the cloth she always carried, the same one that had once wiped saline from a hospital floor. It was worn thin now, but clean, a relic of a moment that had changed everything. She folded it neatly, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "We did it, Dad. They can hear now." The wind off the lake carried a faint hum, part breeze, part memory, and she realized that somewhere, in thousands of hospitals across the world, machines were breathing evenly, in rhythm, together. She smiled, then wrote her final note in the notebook that had traveled with her all these years. 10:02 p.m. Global synchronization achieved. The world hums in phase. No system is silent when love listens. She closed the notebook, pressed it gently against her heart, and let the quiet wash over her. And in that stillness, soft as the breath between seconds, the janitor who had once listened to a frightened machine finally heard the world exhale in peace.